tell us a little bit about who you are as a person. I do understand you're pretty into Star Wars, so we'd love to hear a little bit about what you're into, what you like to do.
Sure, absolutely. I'm Calvin Carter. I was born in Tampa, Florida, about 50 or so years ago. And I came to Dallas to go to school and then just never left. Love the city, very positive energy. And as an entrepreneur and as a son of two entrepreneurs, it was really important to me to be in an entrepreneurial type of environment because the environment has such a massive impact on your own behavior and what you do and the opportunities that you find. Married now about 20 years, wonderful life partner. Kelly has been very supportive in all of my, let's be frank, very risky entrepreneurial endeavors. And I've got I've got twin 11-year-old daughters who are ready to take on the world. And in my free time, I like to go boating and go to the lake. I like to I've gotten into astronomy and astrophotography, which is a lot of fun because it's both interesting, it's very hopeful, like the possibility of what's there and what could be, but it's also very technical and frankly quite difficult to do astrophotography the right way. And we could spend hours on why is that, but let's just trust me, it's hard to do right.
For sure.
And then I happen to be a big Star Wars fan. I'm a huge sci-fi fan in general. Again, I like the idea of contemplating what could be possible without limitations. And so I do some cosplay type stuff where I've built some pretty great screen accurate. Usually the bad guys have the best outfits. And so usually it's, Stormtrooper, like I've got a great Cody, which is the trooper that received Order 66. And I've built a couple for my kids. And I also made a female Mandalorian armor set for my wife, who was very kindly wore it twice to two different cosplays and said, okay, I did that. You have the photos. We're done.
For sure. So leading up to the business or kicking it off, where were you at in life? If I recall correctly, this wasn't necessarily your first venture out there in the world. Give us the kind of preceding couple years to how Bottle Rocket actually came to be in existence.
Sure. So going a little bit further back than a couple years, I started let's just call it a technology consultancy in my dorm room at SMU, and did that with a friend that I made on that freshman dorm floor. He and I were the only two people with Macintoshes. We were very much into our computers and what we could do with them. The local area network was really just coming out at that time, and Apple Talk allowed you to run network over just very basic telephone type cables. And so we pulled up the carpet in the dorm room hallway when no one was looking, and we laid wire down so that we could actually, have our own little network. So that led to us, when we left SMU, starting a business called Icon Interactive. And Icon Interactive, really, when it came out as custom database design and, office productivity. But then we started really specializing in multimedia. So that's the combination of images and text and audio and video and all these things that were frankly really, really hard to put together back then with such very slow processors and such a tiny amount of memory. And so we did that. And then that, probably in like the mid to late 90s, flipped completely to website development. So when a lot of big companies, in the 97, 98, 99 timeframe, they needed their first website. We were, one of a handful of companies that really were predisposed to being successful in that. We combined that business with 7 other firms. The resulting merged firm went public in the end of 99, and a few months later, there was a bit of a explosion of the bubble. Mm-hmm. And so the business lasted for a few more years, but just continued to really, really, really really struggled. And eventually I moved on, and a partner moved on, and to other things. Then there was this time in my life where I was actually trying to not get back into technology. I was trying to, and also did not want to be in an employee-centric business either. Technology consultancies, agencies, whatever word you want to use, very, people-centric. Not just people you serve and the users, the consumers of the people you serve and your clients, but the people you work with, your staff. And I built up this story in my head because when I was running Icon and was hiring a lot of people and whatnot, I wasn't very good at it. And I got very frustrated and made a lot of mistakes. And I started blaming things on the people that I worked with and worked for me. And that was obviously just an immature, short-sighted period of my life. And that is what really drove me to not want to get back in that. However, so for like 6 years, I floated around not really knowing what I was going to do. Did a lot of real estate stuff, entrepreneurial, some investing, that sort of thing. And, but just wasn't happy, wasn't satisfied. And a good friend of mine, Rand Stegan, said, he goes, Calvin, I know who you are, you know who you are, but you need to admit it to yourself. This stuff is in your blood. And shortly after that, I was in a pretty bad crash, and for about a year, I was just kind of recuperating, not just physically but mentally. A little PTSD that I was dealing with, and I kept thinking about that as I was recovering. And then one day, March 6, 2008, to be specific, I was watching an Apple keynote, and in this particular keynote, Steve Jobs was talking about opening the iPhone to third-party developers, and in the not too distant future, he was going to be opening something called an App Store. So if you can put your brain back into a pre-App Store world, which is difficult to think how we live without them. So every convenience that we have, we obviously take for granted. And if you put your head back there, that's when I decided, you know what? That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I was predisposed to that type of thing because of technology, but it was now technology made fun again because there were new challenges and new paradigms to figure out and new standards to set, new devices to figure out, all new code to figure out, new design standards. And it was just a lot of fun. And the next morning, literally 9 a.m. the next morning, got up, and as an entrepreneur, I believe, you've got to always be moving. Sometimes you move backwards, sometimes you move forward, but you have to always be putting one step ahead of the other, at least every day. And you don't have to have it all figured out to start your journey. You just have to pick a direction and start walking. And so the thing that I could do the day after watching this video was I went to Office Depot and I bought graph paper, I bought pencils, and I sat down with my iPhone and the roughly 10 or so apps that were pre-installed on it by Apple, and started to really learn what is good design, what is good usability in that form factor, and sketched my heart out and sketched about 30, I think I sketched 33 different app ideas. And when I say sketch, usually I drew between 50 and 100 screens per app idea. So it's thousands and thousands of screens, what I call cells, all hand drawn on purpose. No computer design and annotation software used at all, because I was building a muscle. And when you need to build a muscle, you need to do something that has that, I guess, what we call it, kinesthetic or just physical activity of really doing that. And so that was the kind of the beginning of Bottle Rocket, and obviously it goes from there.
For sure. So let's kind of dive into it a little head first now, I guess, since we've established where the idea came from and kind of that inspiration. Those first few years, so really making it into a company. what were some of the hurdles you had to overcome?
Well, first off, one of the hurdles I had to overcome was to learn how to do the thing that I was going to turn around and base my entire business around. The other one was how do a friend of mine calls it building the shadow. How do I build the shadow? So if you can think about a shadow, you can have, depending on where you put the light, you can make the person shadow really tall, or you can make it really short, depending on where that light is and where that wall is. And when you're starting from literally nothing, 0 clients, 0 experience, don't even have a name for your business yet, it's difficult, but not impossible to build the shadow. And so the work that I was, doing and was starting to do through that summer, and the creative work and the programming and everything else from the kind of the band of contractors that I was able to find on Craigslist, that I, still love today to this day very much. We were able to take that in with like really good design, approach, and our chief designer was Brian Gradowski, who is a phenomenal designer, and he built our brand and all the logos and everything else. But he was able to take that and turn it into like really great marketing materials, website, et cetera, so that when I did have a chance to talk to someone about apps, I came off very professional. I did not come off like the person who was working in their house, using a second bedroom as an office. But that's in fact what I was doing. We very quickly started to, realize that we needed to have an office. Until we could afford an office, we would all just come to Starbucks and bring our computers and our graph paper and our monitors even, and we would set up shop in a Starbucks. But then shortly after that, I was able to secure some office space very inexpensively, and start to kind of build the team. So that building the shadow is important, not just for when you're trying to attract clients. It's also very important when you're trying to attract people. And there's this great video. I can't remember the name of the author. It's on YouTube, and First Follower is probably the best thing to look at, search for when you're on YouTube looking for this. And it's a really great 2 or 3 minute video, which really drives home the idea that the founder is nothing without the first person following that founder's vision. That first follower validates the entrepreneur and his or her vision. And this first follower makes it safer for the second follower. And the first and second make it safer for the third. So the first follower at Bottle Rocket was a good friend of mine and someone who worked with me at Icon Interactive named Matt Johnson. And so he, was willing to put his, kind of career and income at risk to come to Bottle Rocket and full time. And from there, we started building and building and building. Obviously, cash flow is always a big challenge as well. We're 100% self-funded. We've never taken outside capital, and which does actually lead to later in the conversation when we talk about the sale of the business. Why did I do that?
Definitely. So something you mentioned there, kind of showing up and trying to look professional in essentially a non-existent market. What is it like sticking your neck out there, trying to sell a product in essentially a market that doesn't exist yet?
So it's challenging. We're a 12-year overnight success, and the first couple of years it was pretty sleepy, because there was a lot of us designing apps, putting them on the App Store, not making enough money to consider it a financial success, trying again. So actually, we launched 8 apps for our own account, various things, productivity tools, games, things like that. 8 apps by the end of 2008. And the first 7 would be considered financial failures. And, my friends were saying, you're crazy, you're putting your family at risk. Kelly was asking deeper and deeper questions about, so where does this go? And, at what point do we try to pivot and things like that? Not pressuring me, but just making sure that I was aware of that. But the 8th one was successful. And then when I decided at the end of 2008 to pivot the business, now that we had built essentially a bunch of apps, some were successful financially, one was successful financially, the others were not. They were all successful in terms of design and usability, and people liked them. It was just hard to make money by selling stuff on the App Store in 2008. And the pivot became kind of going back to what I did at Icon Interactive, which is professional services, providing services to large companies that can't figure out what the small companies have been able to figure out. And that made all the difference in the world. And when I got my first shot at sitting down with a potential paying client, I had those 8 apps, which were my portfolio. And I had this muscle I had built by hand drawing all these pencils, which was what my ability to listen to. It was NPR was our first paying client. When they called us, they told me kind of what they wanted to do. I said, great, I'll call you back tomorrow. That night, I literally sketched the entire app out, hundreds of cells, and gave it to them the next day. And I said, I captured what you wanted to achieve, but I did it in a way that would be considered interesting, novel, and definitely on platform, if you would, makes sense to an iPhone user versus a radio user. And so that muscle I built, and all those failures together, was what won us the NPR business. And that's that shadow I'm talking about. Even your failures can be part of your shadow, that sort of thing.
So the NPR reached you instead you reached them, right?
That is correct. Yeah. So in the early years, of course, you really couldn't find an app developer because that wasn't really like a thing yet. There were people who were building apps and putting them on the store, but there weren't very many, if all, any people that were building apps for other people on a contract basis. Of course, there were some system integration firms and some IT firms that would claim they could do it, but it's not just about the engineering. It's about so many different crafts that you have to bring together in symphony to produce digital experiences that surprise and delight. And at the time, we were building a great relationship with Apple. We were going to lots of events, for the developers and the designers of this platform. Some that Apple were putting on, some that other local areas were putting on. And our head of business development here, Andrew Seven, has a great quote. He says, "You got to be in the room. You've got to be in the room. You don't have to know what's going to happen in the room, but you have to be there to find out." And so we had to be there. We had to say, okay, we're going to go to Southwest. Okay, now we're going to go to WWDC. Now we're going to go to an Apple Tech Talk. Now we're going to go to an Adobe conference, because Adobe was starting to think like, what are we going to do in terms of publishing all this great stuff, but now to phones and tablets versus just screens and paper. And so by doing so, we were able to just meet enough people. And again, being on a short list of companies that could even pull it off for a company like NPR, when they called us, they said they called also 11 other companies. And when I say companies, probably big companies that didn't know how to do it, and little companies like me that were people working out of their house. And so that is how we were able to, win that first, that opportunity. And then that opportunity we really capitalized and leveraged on to build that shadow. One of the things that we did early on is when we cut the deal with NPR, we wrote into the contract that we could write designed and developed by Bottle Rocket on the splash screen, or the screen that would appear when you first tap an app. It's called the default PNG, but that had our name on it, had our logo on it, and you could imagine the millions of people that were launching the NPR iPhone app, and also the sensibilities of the person that would be a fan of NPR would likely be a fan of how we have built our business and the value system that we have and the purpose that we have and the belief system that our business has. And so we would have chief marketing officers of massive companies that use the NPR app, for their daily news, reach out to us and say, hey, I understand you did the NPR app. Do you build apps for other people? And so we were very quickly able to then, within a few months, win opportunities with Disney and CNN and American Express and some other companies that are just huge. But they have to find organizations that really know how to do this. The best way to do that is to find something you like and then figure out who made it.
Right.
Because that's authentic versus a sales pitch of, yeah, sure, I could make it, just give me a chance. And so that really did, launch us. And then, we have put our name, except for a couple, like Disney's attorneys were impossible to convince. And we wanted to work with Disney. So there's a couple that we caved on, but for the vast majority, 90% plus of the work that we've done, we put our name on it. And that's also an important part of our culture because, I consider the things that we do here, I consider them crafts. They are noble crafts. Everything that we do here, whether you're in the finance group or the sales group or engineering or experience design or quality assurance, that's your craft. And an artist deserves to sign their work. And so we wanted to be able to sign our work that we release to the world, and it would keep us connected with that work. Sure, it would help with marketing too, but it would keep us emotionally connected with that work. And I had to tell you, it did drive myself and the other Rocketeers to go above and beyond because our name was going to be on this thing.
Absolutely.
So when was the NPR contract? Was it which year?
It's probably like January of 2009, and I think it was like I said, like 2008 was all about like getting into the business and launching the apps, learning a lot of stuff. I think it was January 2009 is when I first started working with talking with NPR. I'd say probably a couple of months later, we moved to a contract, and it was probably the summer of 2009 that the first NPR iPhone app was released.
Then when the other companies reach you, like Disney and others?
So probably the spring and summer of 2009, when first off NPR started saying nice things about us before we had launched.
Okay.
And again, they're talking with companies that are going to like our belief system because of their belief system. And so then it really started ramping up in the summer of 2009 when the iPhone app for NPR came out and our name was on it and press releases and all this other fun stuff.
For sure.
So you became profitable in 2009?
2009, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You start to rent offices. How many people did you have that time?
Well, let's define have. Again, not again, but as an entrepreneur, my mantra is use what you got to get what you want. And as an entrepreneur in a very, very early nascent startup, you don't have a lot, but you do have something. You've got your passion, you've got your vision, you've got your ability to articulate that vision and inspire people, but you also have other things. So when I was looking for app developers, I could not post an ad for app developer because they didn't exist outside of Cupertino. And what I did was I was like, well, what could I do? I was like, well, I can't afford, to spend a ton of money on Monster.com or any of these other like premium search sites. And I probably won't even find the person I'm looking for there anyways. So I went to Craigslist, and Craigslist, I think to this day, they make you go to Craigslist for Dallas separately from Craigslist for Austin, separately from Craigslist from San Jose. So I went to probably a couple of dozen Craigslist sites and set up these essentially want ads, but they were worded differently. There's a great, so Shackleton is known for, I'm going to embarrass myself here, I believe discovering the South Pole. And when he was putting together his crew, he put an ad in the paper. This is obviously a long time ago. And it said something like, perilous journey, possible death, freezing cold, potential starvation, but ability to do something no one else has done before. And when he said that, it was so highly polarizing to the reader that they were either immediately inspired and like, I got to do this, or they were, and probably most people, were totally turned off, which is fine because Shackleton didn't have all day long to talk to everyone who wanted to be famous. He only had the time to talk to the people that were willing to put in the work, try something new, put something at risk, and hopefully enjoyed some rewards from it. And that's how I wrote my Craigslist ads. They weren't as extreme as that. There was not the risk of starvation and things like that. But it was like, have you been crazy enough like me to download the Apple iPhone SDK and start playing with it? Are you like me and you're building apps and you don't even know what to do with them? Are you excited about this but don't know where it's going to go? If so, give me a call, and I'd love to partner and work with other people on this thing that I love so much. And it attracted enough people. I had about 10 people that I was working with. Only one was in Dallas. They were in Austin and New York and San Jose and places like that. And that kind of that band of brothers and sisters came together. We all worked remotely. I did most of the experience design and the quality assurance and the project management. And I had contract engineers and contract designers working with me. So that was the early team. And it was that team, actually it was only just a couple of people from that team that built the NPR app. I remember telling NPR, it was like, yeah, I've got 10 employees, and it's a bit of a white lie because they were not employees. They were contractors that I never even met in person that I was working with over Craigslist. But the important thing is I found the right people and we built really amazing things for NPR.
It's amazing. It's really amazing.
For sure. So NPR is obviously the big initial breakthrough. That's when things really happened for real. From there, when did things really start to grow? Like when did you end up with 200 plus people and all these big names working for you? What kind of time frame are we looking at here?
So I'd say probably, let's use a couple of milestones. So from 2000, all through 2009, we probably had a total of 10 people. But from 10, 11, 12, and 13, so over the next 4 years, we grew to probably about 150 or so people. So again, growing 100% organic. Sure, I wanted to hire more people. Sure, I wanted to hire, a sales force of 20, to go out and grow even faster. But I was interested in authentic growth, and authentic growth is organic growth, where you're earning all of that additional stuff versus raising a lot of money, being very inefficient with that money, and hoping it actually goes someplace. And so just I'm not saying one's better and one's worse; they're just different. And you have to, know who you are, and you have to be true to who you are. And who I am is an organic growth person. And so when we got into 2009, all those other big brand names like Disney and whatnot, we were launching their apps now at either the end of 2009, beginning of 2010. If I'm not mistaken, you might want to fact check this, but I think April the 3rd of 2010 is when the iPad came out. And it was like a second wind, and things really took off when that iPad came out. We were very fortunate to be able to launch on the day the iPad was available in stores. We were very fortunate to launch the NPR iPad app, which just won every award known known to the industry. It was just phenomenal work. And I still thank my lucky stars that I met Ian Dunlop, who was through Craigslist, who lived in Austin, and he was the chief engineer on that. And also something for Disney. So we did the iPhone app for them, and now we launched the feature parity version for tablet. And I thank my lucky stars, and I met Garrett Stutzman, who was in Dallas, the only engineer in Dallas at the time I was working with, who just painstakingly made every single thing about that app beautiful. And we had lots of other opportunities as well. But so we were able to launch 4 apps on. Remember that one of the 8 apps that actually made money? We brought that to the iPad. It was a flight visualizer. Wouldn't call it a flight simulator because it doesn't get into the technicalities of lift and things like that. You really can't crash. But it was a real-time 3D simulation of you flying quickly over mountains and trees and things like that. And it was just a lot of fun. And at the time, accelerometer-based apps were very interesting and novel. They weren't considered passé as they are now. But the idea of turning your phone to turn the plane, that was all new at the time. So there's a lot of things that we take for granted today that we and other designers and developers were inventing for the industry, many years before the rest of the industry did it. So I'd say Apple iPad really allowed us to double down and triple down in terms of our growth. I would also say that around that same time, Android got to a point in its OS, in its development kit, that it was no longer like super risky and unusual, because, admittedly, I would say that, and probably I'm predisposed to say this, but when Apple launched with the iPhone SDK, the App Store, iTunes Connect, all the tools, the debugging tools, the human interface guidelines, they really had a comprehensive, full-on version 1.0, probably more like a version 5 that they called version 1. When Android came out, it came out much more as like an experiment, like many things do when they come out of Google. And that experimentation, meant that like every 6 months they were completely changing their mind and trying something new. So it was very risky to go to an NPR and say, hey, it's time to build your Android app, because by the time you're done building it, they may have completely, deprecated and invalidated everything you did. But when you got to, and I can't remember now if it was 1.6 or 2.0, but when they got to that point, it became something that I felt was a valid platform, if you would. And we hired our first Android developer, Luke Wallace, who still works here today, and to then start adding that as a new revenue component. So now we could go back to all of the clients that had done iPhone apps with us and say, let me show you some information about the marketplace for Android, which again, especially at that time, was significantly more iOS slanted. But we were able to find enough clients who were saying, yeah, I'll do a little experimentation. This year I'll take some budget from something else and I'll put it into this. And then we continued to do iPhone, iPad, and Android, and then eventually Android tablet. And so that became the ability to serve a lot more consumers and have significantly higher billings, which require a growing staff to be able to recognize.
For the billing, do you charge them one time for the development, or you charge them a one-time fee plus some service fees?
So it's a great question. When we were first when we were first going into this, building apps for others like NPR, I was probably not in 2009, but in 2010, I started noticing that some app developers were almost like renting the app to their clients. And I thought about that because I was like, ooh, that's a great way to have a sticky relationship. And if they ever stop paying the bill, you take the app back. And wow, that might be a great way to do it. But then I started thinking more and more about not just what's going to be good for my short-term business success, but what's going to be good for my long-term reputation building. And what started happening is companies, some app developers, when let's say they got paid by someone to build the app and they were going to charge it to them for X number of dollars a month or a year, they would then take that app and they would publish it on the App Store under their own developer account. And so my competitors were doing work with big multinational firms. And then when you go to the App Store and you click on who made the, and I'm just going to say Acme company, who built the app, it'll say, Joe Bob, the developer, built the app. It doesn't say Acme company built the app. And now that's not allowed. But what it did is it put, essentially, app developers were holding their clients hostage. They wouldn't use those words, but that's what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And I would rather someone work with me year after year because they want to versus they feel like they have to. So we decided to do a work for hire type of relationship where we get paid a fair amount for the amount of effort and quality that we deliver. But there is one time in our history, and I'd say it would probably from 2012 to 2017-ish. So about for 5 years, and this is a big learning for me. So Bottle Rocket's a professional services company. Yeah, we've got lots of great tech, but we build that tech under contract with our clients. And obviously we own some of the tech that are reusable components that we can use to accelerate our projects. But the vast majority of the lines of code we write and the images, the screens we design, et cetera, are owned by our clients and should be. But what that led us into, or in 2012, you'll probably remember that was around the time that HBO Go came out. And so those are called, that genre of app is called a TV Everywhere app. And so we had TNT and TBS, two sides of the same coin, so to speak, come to us, Turner, and saying, hey, we need this thing like HBO. So we needed to build something like HBO. And we did that. And we were building two. So good architecture, we tried to put as much common plumbing in the foundation and then build experiences on top of that. But that was done work for hire. And then Scripps came to us and they wanted apps for Food Network, HGTV, DIY, and Travel Channel, I believe. And at that point, we were sitting around the office one day saying, like, you know what? There's a lot of cable companies and broadcasters and operators that are going to need pretty much the exact same thing that we just built for TBS and Turner, and we're about to start building for Scripps. So we went to Scripps. We had a good relationship with them, and we went to them and we said, we are going to, at some point, build our own platform because we want to build hundreds of these things one day. And we would love for us to do that with you. And so I think we basically charged them 50% less than we would have charged them. They got what they wanted for half the cost, and we had the right to own the code afterwards. So they had kind of preferential treatment, most favored nation type of status, and we were able to then take that and we turned that into a pretty decent business. And we landed NBC Universal. They have about 11 brands that like Bravo and NBC the Peacock and E and all these other different NBC properties. And that was a pretty great contract with us. We started doing lots of sports outlets that had their own footage. We still do, like Cowboys and Ravens and Packers today. The thing that I mentioned earlier was something that was a good learning opportunity for me. What I learned was a service company and a product company are very, very different companies. I incorrectly assume it's the same skill sets, right? I need great design. I need project management and quality assurance. I need great engineering. And I need all those things, whether I build a custom thing or whether I build a technology platform thing. But the reality is they run very, very differently, and the fundamentals are different. A product company very traditionally has an enormous amount of investment pre-revenue. And so usually a product company raises money. We had a services company that was growing organically very successfully, but wasn't throwing off huge amounts of cash because we were plunging it back into the reinvesting into the services growth. And so we were always working on a diet. It's like, I'm going to run this marathon, but I'm not going to eat very much, for the month before. So we were always trying to catch up. We did really great work. We won tons of awards. We were even up for I didn't know the Emmys had this, but we were nominated for an Emmy in, I guess, technology related to broadcast and entertainment media. And we won all sorts of other awards for the platform. But in 2017, we decided, listen, we've got to pick a lane here. And the focus on the product side of the business started to hurt, to impact the bigger side of the business with services. So we, very politely and professionally started kind of winding down relationships. Whenever, if a client ever said like, well, I think this is unfair, be like, you tell us what you want and we're going to do it, because we don't want you to think that we don't want you to think that we're leaving you high and dry. We had this program called No App Left Behind, and the idea was we didn't want to leave any client with an app that they couldn't continue to maintain themselves. We offloaded some of the work to competitors, which again we were happy to do because we really were focused on our client, and I think we handled it the right way to the point that we've gotten other custom business from those same companies that we were working with in a product. In the product business, to your point, that was more of a rental. So instead of $1 million for iPad and iPhone and Android tablet and Roku and Apple TV and all that stuff together, because you really needed all of it. You couldn't just have an iPhone app in TV Everywhere. That's why it's called TV Everywhere. And the idea, instead of charging an enormous amount of money for a custom engagement, you could charge a 10th of that or a 5th of that. And on an annual recurring basis, a non-perpetual license. And it was a good business. It was just not a business that we decided was worth putting the other parts of our business at risk.
So today you're still a product business, right?
We'll still service. Yeah, the product business is what we decided in 2017 that we should not go forward with, and we focus 100% on service.
Okay, I got it. So most revenues are recurring every year.
Most of our revenues are they're because we're on the product revenues were by definition recurring every year. These services revenues, it depends. I'd say about 50 to 65% of our revenue, maybe as high as 70, is recurring each year. But it doesn't recur because the client is forced to continue to work with us for their app or their site or their Alexa skill or whatever to continue to run. It's because they choose to. So, for example, Southwest Airlines, we do all of Southwest Airlines mobile. We started with Android, we went to iOS, and then fairly recently we've taken on mobile web, and that's a 5-year relationship. There's other clients that come to us, and they have more of a project mentality than a product mentality, and that's okay. It's not as mature as a product mentality, but maybe it's the right thing for them at the time. And they might hire us to do something, and it might take 6 months, it might take a year, it might take 4 months, and we complete it, and then we would offer that client, do you want us to continue to maintain this for you? Like if you're not going to get into basically kind of a recurring annual team-based relationship that we have with Southwest Airlines, if we're going to build it and then we're not going to keep the team going, we would say we will teach your staff how to maintain this because we don't want it to turn bad over a period of months of poor maintenance and management, because remember our name's on it. Or we offered them a maintenance program. And so what we did over time is we built about a dozen or so people in the organization, pulled them aside out of big project work, and had them work on iterative type work in maintenance, bug fixes, and uptime, and monitoring, tracking, things like that for our clients. And that turned out to be a pretty great way to maintain some connective tissue with the type of client that felt would normally be one and done. They have you do something and you never hear from them again. You have no relationship with them, at that point. But probably half of those decided to do the maintenance. So half are on the recurring contracts, and then that other half of that other half are on recurring maintenance contracts. But frankly, all those contracts we have to earn the right to renew every year.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned some of these changing points and learned lessons along the way. Speaking on that note, putting your logo on things, signing your work in a sense, and then working with these clients to truly create a relationship rather than holding them hostage, as you put it in your own words. What would you say were kind of those key points of doing things right along the way where you really found success from doing something different than somebody else?
So I would answer that by talking about the importance of a well-articulated, authentic, and truthful value system. There's a lot of companies, especially startups, they start and they just focus on the work and they focus on the opportunity and what do I got to get done? They put out fires. And they've never really ever articulate who they really are, what they believe in, what they're willing to take a stand for. And I think that all startups should, if they could, they would start with that. If an entrepreneur is sitting down today saying, you know what, I want to start this business next month, or I've started this business fairly recently, I would say sit down and take the hours, if not days or weeks it's going to take for you to do the proper work to come up with what is your business purpose. Bottle Rockets is, we exist to make things that matter. And that word matter is broken down into like a dozen different things. So there's a lot of meat there. If you're a Rocketeer, you learn all that. And then your value system. And your values are not your aspirations. Your values are who you truly are today and what you truly believe in today. So if you have, like I did when I was building my personal values when I was in my 20s, again, through my friendship with Rand Stegan, at a very early age, I learned the value of values. And so when I was starting, Bottle Rocket, I already had decades of being a believer in the power of values. And so when we sat down to develop our values, when I did in my 20s, in my personal values, I wrote down health and fitness as one of my values. I'll be honest with you, that's not a value of mine. I learned after months of seeing it on my list and like, well, that makes sense, but why do I feel so uncomfortable that is on the list? It's like, oh, I know, it's not a value, it's an aspiration. I'm not saying health and fitness is not valuable. Trust me, I wish that health and fitness was a true value of mine. But if I kept it on my list, I'd be lying to myself and the people around me. I could say I have aspirations of being healthier and more fit, but who I am is, and then the things that I believe in, whether it's family oriented, whether it's ambition oriented, whether it's caring for others, whether it's building things versus tearing them down, those sorts of things. And when you have those value systems, every decision you make and every action you make afterwards is better and easier and more successful. Because without those values, a problem falls on your desk, you have to solve it and do all this, feeling around and then making a judgment of like, well, maybe we should do this, maybe we shouldn't do this. When you have your values and if your value, let's say you have a big project that comes to you that no one's ever done before, it's going to be really, really hard. But then you're a Rocketeer and you realize, well, one of our values is embrace the impossible. We seek out challenges that others have not been able to, to overcome. Absolutely, we're doing this project versus having to campaign for weeks and try to get everyone on board that, come on, let's try this. I know we can do it, that sort of thing. So we teach our value system to every new Rocketeer. I actually hold that meeting myself. So every single person who joins the business is unfortunate enough to have to be with me for an hour while I drone on about the importance of passion here at Bottle Rocket, what our purpose means, and what these values mean to us. The other thing about values are they're great polarizers. Remember how Shackleton's Want ad in that newspaper really polarized the readership, and like the 2% that would be a fit contacted him and the 98% moved out of his way? That polarization is also found in values, because values are things that you're not willing to bend on. You're not willing to give up on. You're willing to take a punch for it. You're willing to be ridiculed for it. You're willing to be embarrassed for it, but you're not willing to give up on it. And one of the things I did when I was trying to find full-time employees, when we kind of started moving from a contractor model to a full-time employees with an actual office and everything else, on every website there's a careers page, right? And you go to the careers page, or if you went to the careers page of Bottle Rocket back then, it would start off with a very bold and somewhat insulting statement. It would say, "We love Macintoshes, we hate PCs. We love dirty fingers," meaning getting your hands in the dirt. "We hate pointy fingers," meaning don't point your finger at someone else and say it's their fault, not mine. And we had a few things like that. And so before we even got to like the list of like, do I even want a job at this place and what's this place about, we just hit people right up front with a polarizing series of statements that would either get them so excited and engrossed and that now they want to read everything else and they want to talk to us, or bounce off that. And please don't waste your time or ours if you don't also believe in these things, because it's not going to work out. Whether it's not going to work out in the interview phase, or it's not going to work out, a few months after you join the business. And so that honesty and transparency really, really, really served us. And the reality is that a lot of, especially startups, they feel like they have to be everything to everyone because they're so desperate for that first win or that second win. And so they're like, "Oh yeah, we can do that. Oh sure, we can do that." Next thing you know, years later, "Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. We'll figure that out." And they're never able to actually focus on any one thing to really become successful and known for it. And I believe that, I want to be the best of the world at something. So I have to pick a thing to be the best of the world at. And there's another great quote, great for leaders. "The most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing." And if you don't know what that most important thing is, you can't do your job as a leader. But when you do know what that is and you articulate it and you write it down, and then you have the discipline to stick with it. So for the first 8 years of our 12-year history, we did not do anything on web. Nothing. Was there a lot of our clients that said, "Oh, you're really good at this. Would you also do web for us?" Sure. Were there lots of other web RFPs and, inbound leads that came to us? Sure. Did we know how to build websites? Yeah, I've been part of launching over 200 websites. But I said, no, we have to politely decline that because we are being laser focused so we can make a true impact in the world versus a blunt, impression on the world.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. So we've established some good things, some successes along the way. Just because I can't resist, I like to turn the tides every now and again. Were there any mistakes along the way or things that you regret doing or wish you could have done differently?
Yeah, there are lots of mistakes. I'll go over some of the mistakes, but first let me talk a little bit about our philosophy or way of looking at the world when it comes to making mistakes. So when people make a mistake, a lot of people say, "Well, that's a failure." I believe that you never actually fail until you give up. If you do something and it doesn't work out and you try again, that's called an iteration. An iteration, was this an iteration or was this a failure? Well, if you continue to try, it was an iteration. don't get worried about failure. And the reason that I teach that to every Rocketeer that joins the business, and the reason I feel that way is because I have learned that through my life that failure is one of the biggest things that humans are afraid of. And the reason is because failure can lead to embarrassment, and embarrassment can lead to shame, and shame is one of the darkest places a human can go to. When you, and I don't think anyone will ever be completely at ease with failure. They'll always have that fear of failure. It's so built into our DNA, But you can become acclimated to and comfortable with failure, such to the point that you invite failure into your life. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like, there's some cliches about, if you never mess anything up, then you're not trying hard enough, or you're not trying new things. And I'm a big believer of Bottle Rocket continuing to be a learning culture, not a knowing culture. And a learning culture is all about making mistakes, taking, credit for them, and then putting your effort into the iteration that takes you beyond that. So that's the whole idea of around here about failure. There's some places where you mess up and you get fired. Here you mess up and you say, you know what, this didn't work out, I'm going to try it again. Everyone says that's terrific. I would say a couple of things that were mess ups in our businesses. Number one, I think that it would have been better for the business to bring in more and more senior executive level talent earlier on in the company's growth. I felt like as an entrepreneur that I had to do all that stuff. And I felt like it was my responsibility to figure out all these different disparate things, whether they're people issues or technology issues or client issues or funding issues and cash flow and things like that. So if I did it again, I would bring together a more senior team earlier on within the organization's lifespan to really leverage their built-in abilities and their crafts versus me having to kind of figure it out myself. And I'm a quick learner, but I'm not going to be as good at something that you've been doing for 20 years of your professional career. The other thing I would say is, and this is a fairly touchy topic to discuss, but I don't mind discussing it, is, I believe that A players want to work with A players. And this is not a statement about judging people that are progressing in their career, because everything's relative. There are A players that are interns here. There are A players that are executives here. There are A players that are engineers and quality assurance professionals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all across the organization. But an A player wants to work with other A players because an A player became an A player by pushing themselves so hard and wanting to learn everything they possibly could. And so they have that learner's mindset. And if they're surrounded by people that they can't learn from, then they want to go someplace else that they can learn from. And what that means is, and this has been tough for me personally because I, as a individual, I like to see what a person's capable of, or the potential a person has versus what they're capable of. And so I might say I might give someone 5 chances, and I should have just given them 2, because I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic and I want them to succeed. But the reality is to balance that with the needs of the rest of the staff, which is, hey, listen, we're dragging the C player around, and the rehabilitation program's not working, and it's hurting our work. But now it's starting to hurt my morale and my desire to work here, and also it starts to hurt an A player's belief and trust in a company that they really do mean it when they say we want the best quality and the best and embracing the impossible and all these other things that we do believe in. And so we did not prune our garden is the best way to say it. We did not have any sort of process early on in the company whereby we could identify people that were struggling, give them support systems, give them training and opportunities, but then have a point at which we have to make the tough decision. And I remember it's probably 2015, only time in the company's history this ever happened. We were we had a pretty decent number of people on the bench, meaning we had more people than we had revenue at that moment to work. And so we were really, trying to decide, like, well, do we weather it out? Do we let a bunch of people go? And what we decided to do was we decided to let 14 people go. Not a big reduction in force, but it was a big reduction in force for those 14 people. They felt it, as though it was everybody. But the reality was only about 4 of those 14 people were Rocketeers that we felt had gas in their tank, and they were continuing to progress and learn and things like that. The other 10 were, to be totally honest with you, people that we did not identify as struggling early enough. We did not support them like we should have. We did not give them a new opportunity like they deserve. And then we also did not make a final decision of your best, you're going to do your best work someplace else, or you're going to do your best work for your life here at Bottle Rocket. And so to this day, I regret the quote unquote layoff that we had in 2015. And I vowed that, we're never going to do that again. We're just not going to do that again. Obviously, if we have, pullbacks and whatnot, we found other ways to deal with them, flex force and things like that. But the other thing that we do is every 6 months, we sit down and we get very, very, very serious about the future of every Rocketeer. And we don't do that because we're trying to find people to remove from the organization. Quite the opposite. We want everyone who works here to stay here. But we want to find those very small number of Rocketeers that in that 6-month frame have demonstrated signs of struggling and they need help. And the organization also needs to make a decision about them.
Definitely. So just because I have you in this mindset currently, one of our favorite questions that we like to ask our guests here. Is there anything about the business that continuously keeps you up at night that you're worried about?
Sure, because we are, we're judged for, or I think everybody and everything is judged for like the last experience you have with it. You could have a great experience at a restaurant for years with your favorite restaurant. You go in there one time, maybe it's food poisoning, maybe the owner was a jerk to you. And you're like, I'm never coming back here again. Well, in the tech business, that would be releasing unstable code that crashes. It would be tying it to back ends that are not stable themselves. So the app is fine, but the back end, the server and the data from the server is all malformed, and it just jacks up the app's performance. Or we build experiences. We build experiences that are like, used by tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people. Like all people use Southwest Airlines and Hyatt Hotels and Caesars Entertainment and Robert Half and all these other really big organizations. And when we make a mistake, we make the mistake in front of millions and millions and not just our client who we love to death, but also millions and millions of users who one of our values is serve the user. And so I'm always, and this is not like worried because I have a specific reason to be worried. This is just like a light constant hum of paranoia at all times of, are we doing this the right way? Do we have the right testing, mechanisms and technology and the right people? It's one of the reasons why we've invested in quality assurance probably 2 to 3 times more than my competitors in all sorts of ways, and in the people, the technology, accessibility of test devices, all sorts of things that we've homegrown here, because QA is at Bottle Rocket is not an afterthought. At most of my competitors, quality assurance is an afterthought. It's the thing you do at the very end. And it's the thing you don't do if you run out of time. So that would probably be one side of it. So that's like paranoia over continuing to have a spotless record of, it's kind of like the number of days since the last accident that you see the sign in the factory. It's that like number of days since the last like major travesty in terms of, code and design, which was a very long time ago. And I remember the day. So we're doing very, very, very well there. The other thing is it's the economy does, impact us. And so, when companies feel like they need to pull back in spending, we feel it. And it used to be that, early on in, at Bottle Rocket, you kind of committed, you were going to get into mobile, and you just had to kind of like try until you figured it out. And hopefully you found a company like Bottle Rocket to help you get there. But then it started to become like, well, we might have to put the pause on that for a year. It's nothing you did, but, budgets are being changed over here at headquarters, and we're going to be putting, these 4 things on hold that we were relying on for our annual, forecasted goals and budgets and bonus plans and everything else. And so I think that, again, it's more paranoia than, like, I'm not seeing a trend of, of unraveling of demand or anything like that. It's more about that, like, light hum of background paranoia at all times, of always staying frosty and making sure that you're always in conversation with your client. You're always, not every 90 days, but like you're always talking. You have multiple connections to your client. The CEO might be connecting to the CEO. The product person is connecting to the product person. The engineer is connecting to the engineer. This actually shouldn't use north and south for that. But the idea is that there's different people connecting to different groups inside of your client. And they're always saying things like, what's going on? What other issues are you having that we might be able to help you with? Or just tell me, what's the biggest problem on your plate today? And because when we know early on when our clients are in need of something, we can snap into action before it's too late and maybe come up with a solution that they maybe didn't see themselves, versus waiting until, oh yeah, we had all these issues and then we had to cut budgets and now we have to cut your budget. Now it's too late. You can't really, no one does well by trying to catch a falling knife.
Definitely. So before we transition off of the business itself, there was a pretty big change in the business, that acquisition. I'd love to hear your take on it, whether it was good, bad, ugly, something you looked forward to, anything like that.
Sure, absolutely. So the first question I usually get is like, why did I ever sell it in the first place? Again, it was self-funded. The cap table was very healthy. We were growing. We had probably like a 95% CAGR compound annual growth rate for many years, up to that point. So we were growing, doing well. We were making money. We were doing fun work. We enjoyed it, et cetera, et cetera. But going back to that self-funding thing, which has actually allowed us to do what we wanted to do and what we thought was important, versus do what our investor tells us to do and tells us we have to do, or we're going to breach contract and they take this stock. The thing that served us started to be the biggest risk to the company staff. And so, when we got to, let's call it 150 people, the payroll of 150, professionals in the technology and mobile space, that's a lot of money. And myself and my wife, my family, we mortgaged everything to start the business in 2008, and it wasn't for years later that we were able to kind of pay a lot of that stuff down. And I realized, if we had 3 months of a pullback where we were losing enough money for 3 months, I personally would not be able to afford to keep the business alive. And the business, we continued to plunge our profits, or the vast majority of our profits, back into the business. And so there was not a war chest, because we were feeding this growing, doubling every year, hungry machine. And I did not have, an unlimited, savings account. And I just was was kind of in the process of like putting my own personal financial life back into acceptable shape for my family. That I promised them that, once we started making money, we would pay off all these loans and things like that. And so I said to myself, well, early on in the company's history, I'd be an idiot if I didn't sell the business. Now I'm getting to the point where I might be the idiot who should have sold the business. And I also have a lot of friends who grew businesses even much larger than Bottle Rocket and exited them by handing them off to something else so they can get out from under a mountain of debt and everything else. So they really didn't have anything to show for the success that they brought into the market. Now, we weren't for sale, but we were I was at least mindful of the fact that at some point I was going to need to figure out what am I going to do in that rainy day. I had, all the revolving lines of credit that, we were able to get and things like that. But I meant like really deep pockets to last like a 3, 6, or 9 month winter, so to speak. And, so what I thought was, well, I either have to bring on an investor, and now I'm in bed with someone else, and odds are there'll be a point at which they want me to do something that I don't think is right, and I don't want to necessarily push back and be a bad partner, but I also don't want to be a bad leader to the business. And so I decided I was not going to take on an investor, majority or minority investor. It was like an all or nothing thing. And I also was not done with the business. I love the business, operating the business today. And so WPP, which is the world's largest holding company of traditional and digital agencies and professional services firms, kept reaching out to us over and over and over again. And I kept saying, thank you for calling. This isn't the right time. Let's talk in 90 days. The WPP was smart enough to say, like, well, tell me what your plans are for the next 90 days. And I would be like, well, we're here and we're going to be here. And they'd be like, okay. And they wrote that down. They call back in 90 days. And so how'd it go? Well, we got it. Oh, you did, huh? And so that went for about a year of just kind of like every 90 days having a conversation. And we essentially built up a reputation with them that we really were delivering on the goals that we were laying out. So they said, listen, we need to get really serious. It's time to do this, et cetera, et cetera. I started looking around and I said, like, if I was going to try to market time this, I wouldn't do it right now. I might do it in a couple of years, but it's literally impossible to succeed at the market timing game. And because of that, I said, you know what? This is a great firm. We should be honored to be so interested in us and invest so much time with us that I'm going to start the process. And so I hired an investment banker to run a whole process. We talked to 20 other firms because I wanted to make sure that I was finding the best long-term home for not just this business, but this baby. And we came all the way back around to WPP as the best fit in terms of culture, but also mainly the best fit in terms of maintaining autonomy. So there are some other large consultancies that wanted to buy us, but I just knew that we would become a division in a division in a division so far down the line. Our brand name would be stripped from us. Paychecks would now start coming from the parent company. There'd really be nothing of us left in that type of a situation. And so that's where we crossed all those off. And when I sat with WPP, when we're getting very, very serious and getting around to the letter of intent, I said, here's the thing. I'm going to make some demands that might be a little bit too heavy-handed or getting a little too far out over my skis. But, first off, I want in writing, we're not changing the name of the company. We're not changing the logos. We're not changing the location of the office. We're not changing, the types of technology. We get to choose all the hardware and software and everything there. We get to choose who we work with, the clients. We don't have to work with clients that you might want us to. We want to work with clients that share our belief system. And we had all these different things that we call governance and control. And it was a lot of stuff. And some of it was kind of goofy. Like I remember at AWPP saying, like, why do you care, what name is on the paycheck? I was like, because that's part of the veneer of a brand. And if you take that away, now it's a little crack. And like we even didn't go on to their healthcare system because we thought we could do better. And we wanted to continue to live into that idea of like, we're going to figure this out on ourselves, for ourselves. And so that's ultimately the reason why I sold the business was, one, it was time to make sure that should we have a pullback, we have the backing of an organization large enough with long enough horizon, not an investor who's going to throw you away because they have 20 other investments and this one just didn't work out, but a horizon of a strategic acquirer who wanted and needed you to be successful over long term, and they needed what you did. So I got that, and we got the financial backing. We got like the big brother on the playground, that sort of thing that could help us out if we got into issues. Cash flow problems went away day one, but we were also able to maintain our governance and control and our identity and our culture to this day, which has grown even better and better since the acquisition. And the company that I mentioned before, Icon Interactive, it was quite the opposite. When we sold the business for about 6 months, when we merged together, for about 6 months, everyone kind of stayed in their own corners. And then after 6 months, it was like, okay, it's time to all move into the same building. And I remember the day that I walked into that building was the day that I mentally said to myself, I don't belong here anymore. This is not the culture that I worked hard and everyone else worked so hard to build. This is not how we would lay out our office. This is not the kind of client that we would go for. This is not how we would treat a person. And so because of that, I knew that for me personally, be engaged and as passionate as I am, that I was in 2008, I would have to have that if you would, that kind of like that moat around this thing that we love so much and we want to protect. And, to this day, I've been very proud of the fact, as well as very pleased that WPP has honored those things. It's possible that they could have still made life hell for us. But no, they honored their word and they understood the reason why we were asking. And they've allowed us to continue to, run our own show.
Absolutely.
Sounds great.
So we've gone through a great deal of the business. We've hit many aspects, the highs, the lows, even selling the business. Transitioning now, for the entrepreneur that wants to build something, that wants to make their dream a reality, what would be your biggest points of advice?
Well, again, I can only tell you the world as it occurs to me. So it's kind of like your mileage may vary, but this is how the world occurs to me. First off, I believe that if you do something you're passionate about, you'll be the best in the world at it. Because, people don't give up on their passions. Imagine if you're passionate about your family. You don't give up on your family. You put yourself at risk before you put them at risk. You would step in front of a car to protect your child, all of that sort of stuff. Why? Because you're deeply and authentically and completely passionate about that thing called family. And because you're never going to give up on something that you're passionate about, you'll always outlast the other person. The other person might be doing it. I've had a lot of companies join or come into this industry because they realized that there was, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. They're like, ooh, there's really good revenues and margins to be made in this whole mobile thing. So let's get into that. And as soon as it gets a little bit, tough or difficult, they're like, well, I was really never passionate about this. It was just a business. And so I'm willing to get rid of this business and then maybe move on to this other business idea of mine. So it's less about coming up with, some cool idea. And it's more about really doing the journey work to figure out what you believe in and what's important to you. And then hopefully you're lucky enough to find a way to turn that into a business and turn that into a career. I always say, a lot of people say, love what you do. I say, do what you love. Figure out what you love and then go find a way to do it. You can't find a way to get a job at it or start a business at it. Do it as a hobby until you can get to that next level and the next level and the next level all the way through. So finding out your passion and then sticking to it is probably the number one thing. The number two thing would be, and I would say this for whether an entrepreneur or any human, I believe that we humans have this massive self-limiter built into us where we don't believe in ourselves as much as we should. And as an entrepreneur, and I'm not talking about ego, I'm talking about truly believing that you are able to and worthy of the success that you want to have. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that we're in that point of they're going to go to the next level that they pull back because they kind of seize up. And I remember so many times telling my wife Kelly when we had because Icon Interactive grew to about 65 people, and now we're about 200. In this company, Bottle Rocket, is 250. And I remember saying when we hit 65 in Bottle Rocket to my wife, I said, you know what? I have no proof that I know how to run a business bigger than 65 people. I said that again at 80. I said it again at 100. I said it again at 150. 150 was a real pucker moment for us because I forgot who did the study, but there's a study about a person can only have a meaningful relationship with 150 other people. And we're very culture-driven, very relationship-driven here at Bottle Rocket. Unfortunately, I do not know the names of every rocket. I did until we got to 150. And now there's always going to be a group of people at Bottle Rocket that I don't know their names, or I don't know where they're from, or I don't know what their spouse's name is. I don't know if they have children or not. I care about all those things. There's just too many to fit in any one person's head. And so the thing that I want an entrepreneur to listen to is you can do it. Not, I've never done this before. I've never run a company this big before. I've never taken on an account this large before. Remember the first time we had our first $1 million account? Like, oh my gosh, are we going to be good stewards of that amount of budget? But you figure it out. Why? Because you're passionate about it, and you're going to be better in the world than anybody else because you're passionate about it. And you just have to keep putting in the time, keep believing yourself, and putting your foot forward every single day. Always be moving every day. And I really do think that entrepreneurs have one of the toughest times, not just like inspiring their people. Many times that's much easier than inspiring themselves, truly inspiring themselves.
Absolutely. And as a point of inspiration for the people around you in your company and other entrepreneurs out there as well, where would you say that you actually personally look for that inspiration?
My inspiration? Well, I find it in a lot of places. I'd say there's two things I find it in right now. One is like it's like the curiosity of what's possible, and I'm experiencing that through my love of sci-fi, through my love of cosplay, through my love of astrophotography and astronomy, because those are like big unknowns that you explore. The other side of it is more on the business side. Is I am absolutely inspired by the idea of someone having the opportunity to do the best work of their life. And let's be honest, we've all had a job somewhere where we just weren't, that was not an environment where we would ever be able to do the best work of our life, whether it was because people didn't support us or believe in us or didn't give us an opportunity to try things and make mistakes and then continue, because you don't go from like knowing nothing to knowing everything. It's a long journey, a sawtooth journey to get there. And when you here at Bottle Rocket, over the last 12 years, I've worked with a lot of people of various age groups. And I'm not a big believer that age means anything. Whether you're the 18-year-old Rocketeer or the 68-year-old Rocketeer, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is making sure that you have the opportunity to be your best. So everything's relative there. We want you to have the opportunity. I can't make you do the best work of your life, but I can give you the opportunity for you to choose to do the best work of your life. And what I have found is that sometimes it takes a new Rocketeer a little while to really believe what they hear, because it is so unusual than maybe the last place they work. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, Calvin said that, but I'm sure I'm going to get yelled at if I try something that doesn't work out, or lose the company money or something like that. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time for someone to get acclimated that, this really is an authentic place where you can be who you want to be, you fly your flag, and you're going to be appreciated for your contribution, not from some, surface, thing, or what you look like or where you went to school or anything like that. And when you get a large number of people together and they're all leaning in the same direction, oh my gosh, the stuff that you can do. We do more work than, I would say, companies 2 to 3 times our size. And I'm not just saying that out of ego. I'm saying that because I have some knowledge about this and what they're achieving and what they're shipping and what we're shipping and the technology they're working with, the technology we're working with, et cetera, et cetera. And that's only because we've been able to gather enough people that are like-minded in the belief system. We talked about how we do that through polarization and things like that. And then give them the authentic opportunity to learn, which means make mistakes and iterate. And then all focus on, the most important thing, which for us is serving the user. And when we do that, now we're in service, selfless service of a person who's going to use our software or digital experiences that we may not ever meet. But we're here to make their lives just a little bit better every day. And that is really inspiring to me when you have a group of people that is so excited about their career, and they're so proud of themselves, and their family is proud of them for doing the best work of their life. That's just terrific.
For sure. And our kind of catch-all wrap-up question at this point in time, what would you say you're most grateful for in your life?
So, I learned a while ago, or someone taught me a while ago, you either look at life through the lens of scarcity or abundance. And it's natural for humans to look at life through the lens of scarcity. There's not enough food for everyone to eat. There's not enough money for everyone to pay their bills. There's not enough jobs. There's not enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is there's more of all of that than we could ever shake a stick at. I mean, the problem with food is not that we don't have enough food. We have a bad way of distributing food efficiently to those that need it, and not have, and we're very bad about waste around food. But there is enough food material. There's just not the right way of handling it. Through the mindset of scarcity and abundance, I choose abundance. I have to push myself to think abundance sometimes because I'm a human just like everybody else, and I fall back to my, kind of primal nature of there's not enough to go around. But really, life is so abundant. And the thing that I am so grateful for is that life is so abundant. And I'm so grateful for the fact that life gives you as many opportunities that you're willing to take. The people who say there's not enough opportunities for me, it's like, well, you just haven't found it yet. But I guarantee you it's out there, man. It is out there. And I'm just so, fortunate to be in a time in our, history, in a place on our little blue planet that, abundancy can be a way of living and can be a way of thinking. And I'm so fortunate and so inspired by all of the people that have joined Bottle Rocket who have that same mentality of abundance over scarcity.
I have a question, actually, hope maybe last one. Why it's called Bottle Rocket?
So a lot of people ask if I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan, which I am, but it has nothing to do with the movie Bottle Rocket. Bottle Rocket was one of three names that Brian, the chief designer, and I were playing with in early 2008. One of the names was Apptastic, fantastic, with app at the front of it. And gosh, we didn't pick that one. That was a one-trick pony. And the other one that I liked was Be Heroic, lowercase b, all uppercase heroic. And the reason I liked that was because it was an embedded command. When you would pick up the phone and say, thank you for calling Be Heroic, you were embedding the command of being a hero to that person. And I just thought it was a really interesting way that every time someone would speak or hear or read the name of our company, that they would get kind of a bump themselves in confidence and excitement and engagement in life. Well, I was the only person who liked that one. And so talking with friends and colleagues and with Brian and whatnot, Brian kept pushing Bottle Rocket. And at first I was like, Bottle Rocket? I mean, I don't know. What do you mean Bottle Rocket? How does that have to do with technology? What about Apptastic, man? And he said, here's the thing, Calvin. Bottle rockets are very small but very powerful. You hold on to a bottle rocket, too long, it's going to, blow your finger off. When a bottle rocket takes off, it goes from like 0 to 1,000 in like half a millisecond. It just takes off so fast you can't even see where it went. And that idea of small but powerful was, okay, so our company is small but powerful. The devices that we build for are small but powerful. And this company is going to take off like a rocket. And then the great thing about Bottle Rocket is rocket's a very serious word. Serious and rocket, got to be a rocket scientist to understand that stuff, and you got to get it right or someone's going to perish. Bottle is just informal and really kind of takes the formality of rocket away. And it was, and I love Brian for doing this. He said, and that's why it's going to remind you and everyone never take yourself too seriously because we're all trying to figure it out. And so I thought about it for a while and I was like, wow, I really like the idea of small but powerful. I like the idea of, taking off like a rocket. I like the idea of not like, getting too serious about ourselves. And the whole idea of space and space exploration. We don't go to the moon because there's a return on investment. We go to the moon to see if we can go to the moon and then see what's next after that. And that like true, authentic explorer mentality can only be driven by passion because there's very little logic, but it has to be passion. And when JFK did the "We're going to the moon" speech, it was all about passion. There was no logical reasons that was in the best interest of the country. It was all about a passionate attempt to do something that had never been done before. And so he convinced me Bottle Rocket was the best company name ever invented in the history of man.
For sure.
Absolutely. Well, for us over here, that's going to wrap out all of our questions. I know I speak for myself and Charlie included. It was an absolutely inspiring story to hear for us, and we're very excited to get it out to our audience as well. So thank you so much for joining us today and telling us your story.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time.
For sure.
Thank you.